qualified as a medical doctor back in 1982. And for the past 21 years, I've been specializing in what's called ecological medicine. And that is nutritional and environmental medicine. The nutritional half you know all about. And I define it loosely as putting the good stuff in, the good nutrients that we're missing. Environmental medicine is about taking the bad stuff out. And we are dealing with between 80,000 and 100,000 artificial chemicals that have been synthesized since the Industrial Revolution. Some of us, by chance, have liver detox enzyme systems that cope very well with this, at least for a few years. Others of us have liver detox enzyme systems that really can't cope very well at all. Those are genetic differences that would have had no impact on us at all before the Industrial Revolution, but now they matter hugely. So the detox protocols that I'm going to explain are more crucial for some patients than for others, but they're useful for all of us because we're all living in a polluted world and inhaling toxins, drinking toxins, and eating toxins. So I'm going to talk about how to avoid all that, how to get rid of it if it is in your system, with the caveat that I'm sure you all know already, which is you can't detox your patient. Only the patient's liver can detox the patient. So your job is to support the liver, get the obstacles out of its way, and give it all the nourishment and support it needs to do that job. I'm sure you know that already. So I'm going to start with a case history, which is very unusual in that it's a history of two patients whose medical story is completely inextricably interlinked with each other. And I encountered these two people quite early on in my practice, I think at least 15 years ago. And what I learned from it has been with me ever since. So first of all, I was consulted by a youngish woman, I think in her mid-30s, from a country in Eastern Europe. And she had chronic fatigue syndrome. Okay, nothing so unusual in that. But the story of how it began was very unusual. She lived in a rural village on a river in Eastern Europe, and there had been a chemical leak from a factory that was about a mile upstream. And this was a factory making some kind of pharmaceutical product. We don't know what it was, and we still don't know. Court case is ongoing. It was many, many years ago, but we still don't know what the chemical or chemicals are that leaked from that factory. But what we do know is that many, many cattle in the farmer's field died, that the farm that was closest to this leak, the children's pets all died, their rabbits and guinea pigs died. The farmer himself became very, very ill with an autoimmune condition and later died, and his wife is still alive but is also ill. And that many, many people in the village where this patient of mine lived became ill with chronic fatigue. And it was almost entirely the women who became ill rather than the men. So you know that women have the extra detox burden of having to detox our own estrogen all the time. So that keeps the liver busy, and that's why women, for example, can take less alcohol than men. So the liver capacity is slightly reduced. So we did know how this chronic fatigue started, which is very unusual because often we don't. And it can be viral, it can be toxicity, it can be all sorts of other things. But we did know the cause. So in the course of taking the history of this lady, I asked her all the standard medical questions that you ask about a person's symptoms. She had the usual. She had brain fog, she had delayed fatigue, she couldn't function. And I said to her, well, is there any time it got better, any time it got worse? These are standard questions to ask. And she said, oh yes, it got completely better when I was pregnant with my first child. Completely better, she said. I had 9 months where I felt absolutely fine. And then after he was born, I was ill again. So I said with great trepidation, can you tell me about the health of that first child? Is he well? And her face fell. And she said, well, no, he had cancer when he was 4 years old. kidney cancer. And he's been through surgery, removal of the kidney, chemotherapy, radiotherapy. And he's now 9 years old, but he has no energy. She said he's very poorly. He can't walk to school, although it's a 2-minute walk. We have to drive him, and he's very pale and very weak. So I guess by now you're figuring out what's happened. Nature doesn't anticipate toxins in the mother's bloodstream. Nature, as it were, assumes that everything in the mother's body is food for the fetus. So of course, this chemical, whatever it was or whatever they were, went straight through the placenta into the baby. The baby was poisoned, and that's why, ironically, the mother felt much better, because the placenta is a detox organ, and the baby suffers and the mother as well. And if any of you are old enough to remember the Minamata disaster in, I think, the late 50s or early 60s in Japan, where a vast amount of mercury leaked into the water, and all the people were fisher people, they ate fish. So they all got very ill with mercury poisoning, deaths, neurological diseases, babies born with hideous deformities. But the pregnant women were the ones who were all right. Their babies were not, but they were fine because they were detoxing, tragically, all these chemicals through the placenta into the baby. And you may notice, if you're dealing with children with neurodevelopmental problems, you're mostly dealing with a first child, not a second or a third, because they get the whole of the mother's toxic load. So I knew about Minamata. So I kind of figured out what had happened. And, you know, I was able to get this woman very slowly better, but it was difficult because part of the treatment for chronic fatigue is rest, and she was not able to rest. However, a few months later, she brought the little boy to see me. And remember, she had said he was 9 years old. And when he walked in, sort of stumbled in, I thought she'd made a mistake, or I'd made a mistake, because he looked like he was 5 years old. So his growth was stunted. He was very pale, very weak, and listless. So I did a few basic blood tests, just nutritional blood tests, and he was low in absolutely everything. Now, mostly that's because the chemotherapy had damaged his gut lining, so it was leaking all over the place. And it was remarkably simple to restore this child's health. He needed everything. I mean, he needed all the B vitamins, including B12. He needed vitamin C. He needed a lot of iron. He was very anemic. He needed a lot of zinc, obviously at a different time from the iron, because the iron would stop the zinc being absorbed. He needed selenium. He needed lots of magnesium, lots of essential fatty acids, and he needed good food. He was eating rubbish, not because his family ate rubbish, but because when you are severely fatigued, you crave sugar. So he was living on donuts and croissants and all sorts of rubbish. And he really didn't want to eat vegetables at all. So we started getting him to eat fruit, then we moved on to vegetables. And he said, next time he came to see me, he said, through his mum who translated, "I'm eating Dr. Jenny red peppers." He hadn't known that there was such a thing as red peppers. So we got him eating vegetables, we got him eating protein. Right? I mean, there's nothing high-powered about this. This is absolutely basic, but it made him better. And within a year, because I saw him again a year later, he'd grown about 10 centimeters, which is 4 inches. He was normal height. And most importantly, he was now working on the family farm. He was able to walk the dog. He was able to play sport. He was walking to school, and he was running. Now, all of that sounds very exciting, and it is and remains exciting. The sad bit is when he went for his annual checkup with a pediatric oncologist in that country, and it would be the same in this country, the mother was so excited to say, "Look at him, look, doctor, he's grown at last." Because every session she'd been saying, "He's so weak, he's so tired, he's not normal." And the oncologist had just said, "He's cured. What do you want? Your child doesn't have cancer anymore. He's cured. Be grateful." She was grateful. He was alive, but she wanted him strong and healthy and normal height. And now he was. And the pediatric oncologist showed no interest in this whatsoever. It's just not his department. But there you go. It is our department. So that case history tells you about toxicology, but it also tells you about preconception care, and to make sure that before a woman conceives, her system is not full of toxins. So it's important for every one of us, but it's crucially important for young women of reproductive age. All right, So as I say, this was 15 years ago, and I know an awful lot more about detoxing people now than I did then, but it's actually quite hard to do it with kids, and you'll see why as we go through. But this child got better. All he needed was good nutrition, and when he got the energy to go out and about, then he got the fresh air, which helped as well. And the pharmaceutical firm has still not been brought to justice. That's my understanding. Okay, so let's talk about the 7 detox methods. Let me give you a bit of context first. It's all in chapter 7 of my book, Staying Alive in Toxic Times, a seasonal guide to lifelong health, because it talks about living differently in different seasons, eating differently as well. Chapter 7 is about toxins. And what I'm going to be sharing with you today is mostly just the very last part of chapter 7, the take-home tips, if you like, what to actually do. But it is important to read the first part of the chapter as well, because that's telling you what chemicals we're talking about and how they get into you and what the different symptoms are that the different groups of toxins may likely cause. So we've got heavy metals, halogens, that's chlorine, bromine, fluoride, and we've got all the millions of compounds, the millions of compounds like pesticides, plasticizers, what's in your perfume, what's in your cleaning products, and so on. So it's important before you start to detox someone to identify what is likely to be in their system. And you do that by taking a careful environmental history, going right back to their parents' occupations. You know, did their dad work down a mine? Were the pipes made of lead? That sort of thing. And where they live and what kind of substances they use for cleaning themselves and their home. Do they have the windows open? Do they live on a busy road? So you get a sense of what is likely to be in their system. But anybody who lives in the urban 21st century, or indeed in the rural, unless they're on an organic farm, because in the countryside you're exposed to pesticides, in the town you're exposed to air pollution, everybody needs detox. So this is not a kind of go to a health farm and have a deep cleanse. This is something that's much more long-term, as indeed the conditions we're dealing with are long-term. So a couple of basics before you start on the 7 detox methods. One is good nutrition. You can't detox somebody unless they've got good nutrition. And some of the detox methods, as well as taking, for example, toxic heavy metals out of the system, will to some extent drain the good minerals. So you've got to make sure that the person is starting off with a very good level of zinc and magnesium and everything else. And the second thing is you teach people how to avoid the toxins in their environment. To give a really simple example, to replace their toxic commercial perfume with organic essential oils, just a little bottle of lavender or jasmine or orange flower. There's some wonderful essential oils, and that's what perfume used to be. So you need to teach them how to avoid it. Okay. Testing for toxins is difficult but possible, and again that's in the book. If you talk to the people at Biolab, they've got a few tests now they can organize in America that give you a sense of what toxins the person's dealing with. For people who can afford that test, they like to do it because then 6 months later they can see that the toxins are gone. So the 7 methods, I just called them 7 methods. What doctors don't tell you in their recent article called it Dr. Jenny Goodman's Super 7 or something. Okay, that's not my language. Number 1, and these are going to be probably quite familiar to you, but what is powerful is doing all of them together, depending on the person's lifestyle, how able they are to put things into action. Where I find that people are really up to here with toxins, how long does it take to get them clear? That depends on how much time and energy their life allows them to put into the program. 6 months is how long it takes if somebody's able to totally devote themselves to the 7 methods. And it can take a year or 2 if they can only do it piecemeal, but still worth doing. So number 1 is vegetable juicing. Now, I don't mean making vegetable smoothie. A NutriBullet won't do it because that gives you all the fiber. Now, fiber is very good for the gut, but you can get it by eating the vegetables. What we're doing when we juice vegetables and use a masticating juicer that will work with spinach leaves and so on, parsley and watercress, it's not just designed for apples and carrots. What you're doing is extracting the phytonutrients, the antioxidant power that's in the plants in a concentrated form. So it's not equivalent to eating a salad. You're using it as a medicine, not an ordinary nutritious food. So for example, you might put, a little bit of carrot, a little bit of beetroot, not too much because they're very sweet, and the rest green, okay? Lettuce, parsley, watercress, celery, rocket, all the green leaves, a bit of spinach if they haven't got an oxalate issue, and most oxalate issues are caused by dysbiosis, not by high oxalate foods. So there's a list in chapter 7 of which vegetables I would use, and people can adjust it according to their taste. Some people love celery, some people hate it. I think we should learn to love it. But essentially what you're wanting is green juice and no fruit in the juicer, because that gives you a sugar hit. And what the juicing does is it cleanses the gut, it cleanses the liver, it wakes up the taste buds and shifts them from sweet to green. So it's easier for people to give up sugar. But most of all, it provides all the antioxidant nutrients to support the detox process. Because the detox process itself produces waste products and you've got to mop them up. And, if I had to pick one of the 7, this would be it. Now, prevention is better than cure, okay? People who actually have cancer and are using vegetable juicing are needing to do it 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day. People who just want to detox and work preventatively can do it once a day, and you start off with half a pint, you build up to a pint. Some people can get as much as a litre, but don't swig it all in one go. You just sip it gradually. And you can't make it the day before because it will lose some of its antioxidant power. I expect the Chinese medics would say it loses its qi. But whatever it is, it's good if it's fresh. Now, the challenge you have with people in getting them to do this is it is a faff. You have to get your vegetables, wash, peel, not chop them small, but chop them enough to fit in the juicer. And then the hard bit, you have to wash up the juicer. And in the book, I recommend brands of juicers which work well. And as a psychologically aware practitioner, you want to think about how to introduce this and other challenging procedures to your patients. And I have found it's not useful to say, oh, it's really easy, you can just fit that into your daily routine. I have found it's much more effective to sigh a little bit and say, look, this is challenging. And I don't know if you're going to be able to fit this into your daily routine. I won't tell you it's easy. It's a project. And that's paradoxical psychology, right? You express doubt about whether it's possible. They want to get better. So they take the opposite position, which is, yeah, we're going to do this. So get them juicing. Number 2 is, again, probably very familiar. It's Epsom salts baths. Epsom salts is magnesium sulfate, and it does 2 things primarily. The magnesium goes in through the skin and helps to push out heavy metals if you've got heavy metal toxin, and also to stop them being depleted, to stop the good minerals, magnesium, being depleted by any other detox processes you're doing. Most importantly, the sulfate component of Epsom salts helps the liver with its detox. And you'll know that there's several different detox pathways if you go into the biochemistry of this. And some of them use sulfate, particularly the estrogen detox pathways, which are relevant when you're dealing with pesticide and plasticizer toxicity, because those compounds are estrogen mimics. So you get the sulfate in by doing Epsom salts baths. Very, very rarely you'll find somebody with sulfate sensitivity who can't do it, but that is rare. And I would also say pregnant women shouldn't do Epsom salts baths. In fact, they shouldn't do quite a few of these detox methods. They shouldn't do saunas and they shouldn't do colonic hydrotherapy, which is what we're coming on to next. Now, saunas. First of all, I want to quote my teachers. It's Dr. Sarah Myhill, who has taught all of us about the value of saunas. And my favorite is real saunas. Far infrared saunas are great for people with chronic fatigue or who can't take the heat. But real saunas that make you sweat bring out of the body the fat-soluble toxins, the lipophilic substances, which are in the layer of fat just under the skin. Now, the vast, vast majority of synthetic chemicals that are making us ill are fat-soluble, like they're lipophilic. They dissolve in fat, and therefore they get into our cell membranes, they get through our cell membranes, they get into every cell of the body and every system. That's why we're now seeing so much multi-system illness, people with problems in several systems of the body, which of course instantly gives the GP overwhelm and they say it's all in your head. Well, on one level, they're right. Fat-soluble substances are in your head because the brain is largely made of fat, and that's where they are. So if we want to get these fat-soluble substances out, we need to sweat them out. And I describe in the book in some detail, and I'll tell you briefly here, how to do it. You don't just get someone to go and sit in the sauna for half an hour. First of all, they take with them a clean, dry towel to wipe off the sweat as soon as they begin to break a sweat. And that's because, yes, these toxins will come out with the sweat, but then the skin will just reabsorb them again. Right? And so you have to prevent that. So you sweat and wipe and sweat and wipe. So clean towel to sit on and a clean towel to wipe off the sweat. Of course, all this has been impossible for over a year because of lockdown, but gyms are open again now. So you only get people to stay in there for 5 minutes for the first time. And even if they're okay with that and they get used to it, probably you never do more than 10 minutes because it's not useful. All the nasties that are going to come out in the first 5 or 10 minutes. And again, this is something we've learned from the brilliant Dr. Sarah Myhill. And you do it ideally 3 times a week, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but only for 5 or 10 minutes each time. Now, again, that's a challenge because somebody might have a journey to the gym or the health club where they do that and a journey back again 3 times a week and they're only in there for a few minutes. Yes, it's worth it. And the other thing to remember is that the sweating definitely will drain the good minerals out of the body. So you need something like Body Bio's E-Light to put the good minerals back in again, the basics, sodium, potassium, chloride, zinc, and magnesium. So you put them back in with lots of water, obviously, after the sauna, and it makes a difference, and you can measure the difference. Infrared sauna, is gentler and slower, and I would only use it if somebody can't do saunas. By the way, the other category of people who may not be able to do hot saunas is women who've had breast cancer and have had the lymph nodes removed from the axilla, from under the armpit. Sometimes that means that hot saunas are out of the question for them. You will find some people say, I don't sweat. In fact, you'll find quite a lot of poisoned people telling you they don't sweat, because one of the reasons that makes some of us more vulnerable than others to the effects of chemical toxins is precisely the inability to sweat. So it's not just about the liver. It's not just about your genetic liver capacity. If you don't sweat, you are the one that's going to be suffering from the mercury fillings in your mouth or the chemicals you've encountered in our environment. What I have discovered over the years is that people's bodies can start to sweat. So it's well worth persisting. If your client comes back to you and says, well, I sat there for 10 minutes and I didn't break a sweat, you say, all right, keep going. And sometimes it takes weeks or months, but people do start to sweat. And they're actually thrilled when that happens and they start to feel better. I don't know the mechanism of it. I don't know how that capacity gets reactivated, but it does. Okay, so we've mentioned 3 methods: vegetable juicing, Epsom salts baths, doing saunas and doing them the right way.